All praises to the Most High. I've been raising my vibration, yoga meditation, just sticking to the basics, living in the matrix. It's cynical and crazy, but I've been swimming in amazement, writing all these verses, reversing all my curses, walking in my purpose, doing it on.
Hey, welcome to Root Work, where everything is healing. I am your host, Catherine, S-E-R-O-K. I am the Master Addictions Counselor. And so today we are going to be, we're going to be breaking down the word addiction. Why not start there? So addiction. So there's so many different definitions for the word addiction. But if you are like me, then you know that words carry power. So I think that when we start talking about addiction, we need to first understand what it is. So let's break the word down. So I've kind of broken it into some parts myself. And so, do feel free to drop me some type of comment during the course of this breakdown and let me know your thoughts and what you think that it is, or, let me know what you think about my breakdown. So the word addiction, when we're breaking this word down, let's go all the way back to what is this? Maybe sixth grade, seventh. I can't recall the grade, but I know it's when we were practicing understanding words, prefixes, suffixes, for that part. So we understood that words had word parts. We understood it was a prefix, there were root words, and then there were suffixes. So depending on the prefix of the word is what the word could mean. When we break that word apart, it has a root word, which is the word in its most simplest form, you could say. And then you have the suffixes, which is something that you add on to the end of the word that also gives the word a different meaning itself as well. So when we are looking at the word addiction, we are looking at the root word of it, right, is going to be you would almost think that it would be to add, right? Because if you broke up addiction, you get add, right? When I looked it up, it's the word, it's like a past principle of us adhere, and that meaning is to assign, is what that means. It means to assign, to surrender, to devote, is that Latin meaning. Because remember, all these words, when we get to talking about language, and the language that we know is based off the Latin. So the prefix AD, not ADD, but add, means towards. So if you think about, right, it's leaning in towards something. When we think about addition, right, we're adding to. So nonetheless, we're still leaning into something, right? That's what we're doing. So the root verb, which would be desire, means to say or to declare, right? So I'm declaring what it is that I'm adding or I'm leaning into. Okay. And the suffix, which is the TION at the end of addiction, right, is the action of. So we learned that TION is the action of doing something, right? So when you put those words together, you get to assign or to surrender self to something, right? To lean into, to declare what it is that you are leaning, surrendering, or devoting yourself to, and you are in the action of doing that. So that puts you in a cycle of repeat, right? Because we are in the motion of doing something, right? So if we was to take this into, so if I was to break this down even simpler, right? To add on would be to surrender to whatever you're adding to you, and you're in a constant motion of that. So you can be adding on makeup, right? You could be adding on, depending on what you're adding on. So if we are looking at the world in positive or negative, it's going to matter what you are devoting yourself to, what you are surrendering yourself to. And this is not a one-off event. This is the TION, the action of doing it. So this is for a perpetual state of adding something to you, whether it is good or bad. There is going to be some type of change. So even if we was to look at it being from a more positive state, right? The more words that we add to us are in the motion of adding on, probably the better our vocabulary is going to be, right? I am in the motion of probably becoming a scholar because of the amount of words, right? Or at least a person that has a huge index of words. If I am constantly adding on food, let's take food, for example, and I'm constantly in the motion of adding on food, well, 9 times out of 10, the side effect, right, is going to probably be some weight. Right? And then whatever is associated with weight. So even though we're not thinking about and understanding that to change one thing is to change a multitude of things. So if I'm constantly in a state of adding something on and it's unhealthy, then I'm also in the state of transforming something into something that is unhealthy. Right? If I'm constantly on the other side of adding something on that is positive, then I'm constantly in motion of probably becoming a more positive person. Right? Good or bad. Because that is how the world works. That is how that is universal knowledge. There's an opposite for everything. The truth is somewhere in the middle, but there's an opposite to everything. So let's go a little bit deeper in this meaning. Original Atticus referred to a person formerly bound or enslaved to another due or debt. Over time, it evolved to being described as being enslaved to a habit or a substance. Today, psychological dependence on substances or behaviors despite harmful consequences. So if you go back to even the origination of the word, we are assigning and or surrendering and or being devoted to something. So it didn't necessarily change. The meaning didn't necessarily change. It just became a little bit more simplified for the person that needed to be understood in the back, right? That I am, because if we are surrendering ourselves, that is some type of slavery. Right? You are surrendering your free will to say no. We're not talking about just to substances. We're talking about to anything that has the potential to cause harm in our life. And keep in mind, a lot of what we surrender ourselves to we may not interpret it as being bad. And you take example, codependency, right? We tend to surrender ourselves to people or to what we think is love. The question is, how much are we willing to do that? That we find ourselves devoted to that in a way that becomes very, very, very unhealthy, right? So I think it's always important to understand the word and how we're using it, right? This also debunks and denotes the fact that you use once, you're not going to addiction because you use something once. That's highly, highly, highly unlikely. So when here it is, I use this once. No, that might have made you feel good once. That's what caused the TION, the action of you wanting to continue to feel good because you found something that made you feel good. But it absolutely wasn't because you used it once, right? And you became addicted. That's not how it works. It's not how it works. It has to be the constant motion of something. So even when you take it spiritually, it's a ritual. Whatever you practice the most, you become the best at. You practice language a lot? Well, we've already discussed. You probably are a scholar. You probably have a great vocabulary choice, great word choice. You probably are a great writer. However, you play basketball a lot. Nobody said you're going to be LeBron James, but you probably have some great basketball skills. However, if you're practicing adding on something to you that is unhealthy, it's a good and likely chance that you are going to become whatever that is that you are choosing to add on. So we have to be mindful about that, and we have to understand that addiction is not just drugs and alcohol. Addiction is anything that we're constantly adding to us despite the harmful consequences that are associated with it. I want you to just let that sink in, and then tune back into with me next week, and we're going to go a little bit deeper in understanding some of these addiction terms. There's a lot of addiction terms out here, where addiction came from, different models of addiction. I think it's important for most people to understand that, because when we're talking about addiction, we're not just talking about substance abuse. We're not just talking about fentanyl. We're talking about unhealthy behaviors. We're talking about eating. We're talking about sex. We're talking about codependency. We're talking about being addicted to just being addicted, social media. We're talking about a little bit of all of that. And all of it goes hand in hand. Drugs and alcohol is just something we tend to put on top. But right now, the number one addiction out here is social media and food. So tune in with me next week, and we're going to go a little bit deeper. Thank you for tuning in today.